The day after Martin Luther King was shot, a third-grade teacher in Iowa did something that would get her fired today. She walked into her all-white classroom in Riceville, looked at her 8-year-olds, and said the brown-eyed children were smarter. They were cleaner. They were better. The blue-eyed children, they were lazy, slow, and couldn't be trusted. Then she handed the blue-eyed kids fabric collars and told them to put them on so everyone could see what they were. In 15 minutes, best friends were calling each other stupid. By the end of the day, one child had punched another for being called a blue eyes. And the most unsettling part wasn't that it happened. It was how fast it happened. This is the blue-eyed, brown-eyed experiment. And what it proved about prejudice is something most people still don't want to hear. On the morning of April 4th, 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. was shot on a motel balcony in Memphis, Tennessee. He was 39 years old. The next morning, Friday, April 5th, Jane Elliott drove to work. She taught 3rd grade at Riceville Community Elementary School, a small school in a small town in northeastern Iowa. Population, 898, almost entirely white. Her students had never met a black person. The night before, she'd watched the news. She watched white commentators ask, "Who is going to hold your people together?" She watched them talk about King's death like it was someone else's problem. And she decided her students needed to understand discrimination. Not from a textbook, not in theory. They needed to feel it. She had no training for this, no psychology degree, no curriculum guide. She was a 3rd grade teacher with an idea she'd come up with while ironing. That Friday morning, she asked her class a simple question. What do you know about black people? The answers were what you'd expect from 8-year-olds in rural Iowa in 1968. They repeated what they'd heard at home. Then she asked them something else. Do you think you know what it feels like to be judged by the color of your skin? They said, no, so she told them. Today, the brown-eyed people are the better people in this room. She said brown-eyed children were smarter, cleaner, more civilized. Blue-eyed children were wasteful, lazy, and dumb. She laid out rules. Brown-eyed children got 5 extra minutes at recess. They could go back for seconds at lunch. They got to sit in the front of the classroom. They could drink from the water fountain. Blue-eyed children could not. They had to sit in the back. They couldn't play with the brown-eyed children on the playground. And they had to wear brown fabric collars around their necks, so everyone could identify them from across the room. The collars were the key. They made the difference visible, constant, inescapable. Within minutes, the classroom changed. Brown-eyed children who had been shy and quiet started speaking up. They answered questions faster. They read with more confidence. One girl who had never finished a reading exercise on time suddenly flew through it. The blue-eyed children shrank. They stumbled over words they knew the day before. They gave wrong answers to problems they'd solved yesterday. Their reading scores dropped measurably within a single afternoon, not because they'd gotten less intelligent, because they'd been told they were inferior, and they believed it. A brown-eyed boy refused to play with his best friend at recess. His best friend was blue-eyed. "You're a blue eyes," he said, like it explained everything. 2 boys got into a fight on the playground. One had called the other blue eyes, like it was a slur. The blue-eyed boy punched him. When Elliott asked him why, he said, "He called me that name." It had been 3 hours. These children had known each other their entire lives. They'd slept at each other's houses. They'd shared birthday cakes. And in less time than it takes to watch a movie, they'd turned the color of each other's eyes into something worth fighting over. But here's where it gets worse. The following Monday, Elliott told the class she'd made a mistake. She'd had it backwards. It was actually the blue-eyed children who were superior. The brown-eyed children were the inferior ones. She reversed everything. The collars came off the blue-eyed kids. They went onto the brown-eyed kids. The seating flipped. The privileges switched. And the blue-eyed children, the ones who had just spent a full day being humiliated, excluded, and called names, immediately began doing the exact same thing to the brown-eyed kids. They taunted them. They excluded them. They repeated the same cruelties that had just been done to them. The formerly oppressed became the oppressors. Instantly. But something else happened too. The effect was weaker the second time. The brown-eyed children resisted more. They pushed back. They knew what the exercise felt like. They'd seen how arbitrary the rules were. They still performed worse on tests, but not as dramatically. Elliott had accidentally demonstrated something that psychologists would spend the next 30 years trying to name. What Elliott observed in that classroom has several names now. Psychologists call part of it stereotype threat, a term coined by Claude Steele and Joshua Aronson in 1995. When people are reminded of a negative stereotype about their group, their performance drops. Not because the stereotype is true, because the anxiety of being judged consumes cognitive resources that should be going to the task. Steele and Aronson showed this with black college students taking a standardized test. When the test was described as measuring intellectual ability, black students scored significantly lower. When the exact same test was described as a routine lab exercise, no mention of ability, the gap nearly disappeared. Elliott's blue-eyed children experienced stereotype threat in 1968. 27 years before the research had a name, there's also the Pygmalion effect, demonstrated by Robert Rosenthal and Lenore Jacobson in that same year, 1968. They told elementary school teachers that certain randomly selected students had been identified as intellectual bloomers, kids about to experience a surge in IQ. The students were chosen completely at random. But by the end of the school year, those bloomers had gained significantly more IQ points than their classmates, because the teachers treated them differently. More attention, more encouragement, more challenging material. Elliott's brown-eyed children were the bloomers. Her blue-eyed children were the opposite, kids whose teacher had just labeled them as less. And they performed exactly as expected: in-group bias, out-group derogation, self-fulfilling prophecy. Elliott didn't know any of these terms in 1968. She just watched them all happen, at once, in real time, in a room full of 8-year-olds who still believed in Santa Claus. Elliott repeated the exercise every year with each new class. Word spread. In 1970, she appeared on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. The segment went national, and Riceville turned on her. Parents accused her of psychologically abusing their children. Colleagues stopped speaking to her in the hallway. Her own children were bullied at school, spat on, called names, shoved into lockers. The family received death threats. The town that had been her home for her entire adult life became hostile territory. She eventually left Riceville. She spent the rest of her career running the exercise with adults, in corporate diversity trainings, with prison staff, with university students. She did it for over 50 years. The adults were worse than the children. They cried. They shouted. They stormed out. Some couldn't last 20 minutes in the inferior group before they broke down. The 8-year-olds had lasted a full day. In 1984, the original students from that 1968 class came back. They reunited in Elliott's classroom for a PBS Frontline documentary called A Class Divided. They were in their mid-20s now. Every single one of them said the same thing. It was the most important lesson they ever learned. One man said, "I learned more in that one day than I learned in all the rest of my years in school combined." Jane Elliott didn't discover prejudice. She didn't cure it either. What she did was something simpler and more brutal. She proved how fast it starts. Not generations, not years, not even a full school day. 15 minutes and a box of fabric collars. That's all it took to turn a room of children who loved each other into a room of children who didn't. The experiment is over 50 years old now. It has been repeated in classrooms, boardrooms, and military bases on 6 continents. The result is always the same. Give people a reason to believe they're better than someone else, and they will. Give the other group a reason to believe they're less, and they will too. We like to think prejudice is something we learn slowly, absorbed from culture, from family, from centuries of history. Elliott proved it can be installed in an afternoon. The question was never whether we're capable of it. We always were. The question is how fast we forget that.